Hey there. Welcome back to Business as Unusual. In today's episode, we're chatting with Tom Schwab, CEO of Interview Valet, about innovative connections, the power of podcasts for marketing, and how introverts are shaping the future. It's a conversation I think you'll really enjoy. Let's dive in.
Business as Unusual is a thought-provoking podcast that explores the innovative strategies, disruptive ideas, and unconventional practices driving successful leaders and companies in the ever-evolving world of modern business. Subscribe, comment, and share for weekly inspiration with our host, Aicila.
Hello, welcome to Business as Unusual. I'm here today with Tom Schwab, the CEO and founder of Interview Valet. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, Tom.
Oh, Aicila, thank you for having me here. And I always say CEO for me stands for Chief Evangelist Officer, right? I have friends that are CEOs of publicly traded companies. What I do is much different, right? Don't deal with investors in Wall Street. I'm here to evangelize for the category, for our clients, and for our company.
Well, so I know what Interview Valet is because I've had the privilege of working with you. Would you be willing to explain a little bit more about what it is to our listeners?
Yes. So our point of view is that today, this idea of breaking through the noise is laughable. Right? Everybody's yelling, nobody's getting heard. And better to get in on the conversations that people are already listening to. We believe that you're not one funnel away. No matter what everybody says, you're one conversation away. And so Interview Valet for the last decade has helped inspiring thought leaders, coaches, consultants, brands, category designers get out there on podcasts their ideal customers are listening to, so they can get that know, like, and trust and grow their business through that. I'm here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but our team from the very beginning has been completely remote. We've got 22 great people on the team, and I jokingly say, it's true, the microphone makes me sound good, and my team makes me look good.
That's fantastic. When you make your team look good, which I have always felt like is a sign of a good leader, because they definitely shine. And I'll let my listeners know. So part of how I got connected actually with Interview Valet is they found me. And many of the fabulous guests that I've had in the last year are the result of their efforts. And it's been fabulous to meet people that I wouldn't have met otherwise who are doing really amazing things in the world. So that's part of why I was so excited when Tom was suggested as a guest, because I was like, this is such a great partnership. I would love to have people know more about what you're up to and how it started.
Yeah, and I think really the best gift you can ever give someone is introducing them to a new person or a new idea, right? It's the one thing that we can't do for ourselves, and it can really change your life when we get to do it every day.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's one of the things I love about podcasting is getting the chance to meet, especially as a consultant and a remote worker myself, that water cooler moment that you can have when you work in an office of getting to just sort of chat with other people that are in your industry or solving similar problems. There's a camaraderie to that is not always easy to access, but doing the podcast means I get to talk with people who are often, if not facing the same types of things, interesting things, and also inspiring things. So I appreciate that opportunity as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems in the world, but there's no better time to be alive, right? That we can connect, we can talk here and let the world listen in, because that social connection, no matter where we are in the world with AI or whatever, we still need that.
You started in podcasting a little bit before I did. I had a dream of starting a podcast in 2011, but I didn't start my first one until 2017. And then this one was 2022. And I know from my own experience that it's changed significantly. What have you seen coming from that aspect of helping people with podcasts? Has it always been podcasts that you've helped them with, or do you have a larger range of things that you bring people to?
We focus on podcasts, but where it started before this, my previous business was HubSpot's first e-commerce case study. And we built that whole business with guest blogs from
Hmm.
2000, oh, it was probably 2006 up till about 2011 or 12. We used guest blogs. And you could see every year guest blogs didn't work nearly as well. And so about 2013, 2014, I started to hypothesize that I bet you could use podcast interviews that same way to tap in the audience, get that know, like, and trust. We tested it. It worked really well. And we beta tested it, and the client said, yeah, please do this. And one of them actually bought us the name Interview Valet and said, here, you should use this. And it was funny because the first probably 3 years I'd give my elevator pitch like we all do, and people would go, what's a podcast? And then about 2019, it started to take off. One of the things I'm amazed by is that we still call it a podcast, right? Because if you were there in 2011, you remember listening to it on an iPod. And that's where it came from. Today, podcasts are, well, YouTube is one of the biggest search engines for podcasts. People listen to Joe Rogan's clips on TikTok or Facebook, and it's like, are they listening to a podcast? I don't know. I think it's just an amazing thing where you can create the way you want, and then people can consume the way they want. And, when we first started, it was both of us, it was audio only, right? Now, post pandemic, 90% of podcasts include video.
They do. And that, I'll be honest, that was a huge adjustment for me. I was not an enthusiastic videoer. I have a really good friend who constantly nudges me towards making what I call face videos. I like to do the audiograms, and she's like, you need to do some videos that you're in. I'm like, face videos. And she's not wrong. People do really respond to that. They like the ability to look you in the eye to a certain extent. And there is a level of connection and authenticity that I think you can achieve through that. But I like the audio part for some reason. I've just always really been drawn to that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You said authenticity. I think today more than anything, people want that authenticity because, everything you see, it's like, oh, was that written by AI? Was that blog written by AI? Even some of the audio and video now. And so we're all watching for these little clues, right? So when I don't finish my sentences, when I drop my G's, it's because I'm from Chicago, not because I'm AI. And I think people watch that and they're like, oh yeah, that's real. And I think that what relates to people, and we like faces and real people more than we like AI. And I think we can spot it as quickly as the search engines can.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like something that you talked about right when we started around the relational piece, I feel like we are all highly connected and yet, or should like engaged, right? Like stimulated, but we're not necessarily connected. That feeling of really knowing people. I talked about it actually earlier this week. So I think it's a little bit of a theme for me in terms of that reality of a lot of our tools are using us instead of us using our tools.
Yeah.
And using it to bring us into connection. I called someone on the phone back when I was in high school so that I could hang out with them and go see them. It wasn't the sole part of our relationship, but a lot of the modern social media ends up feeling like it gets used as a replacement. And there really is no replacement for actually interacting with someone.
Interacting. I think the power of voice there's something with that too. Have you had anybody recognize you from your voice on the podcast yet? It will happen.
No, I haven't.
I was at an airport and I was on the airplane. I was walking off and somebody looked at me and said, like, are you Tom Schwab? And my first thought was, are you a process server? Right? No, I'm not. And he's like, I recognized your voice. And I didn't know who this person was, but they recognized me from, I don't know, a podcast interview or whatever. And our looks can change, right? If you saw me walking through an airport at 5 a.m., I hope you wouldn't recognize me, right? But that voice, that stays consistent throughout time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's actually how I will recognize actors in movies. I very rarely will recognize their faces, but I'll be like, oh, I've heard that voice before. It reminds me of this thing, and then I'll find them.
And that's important in building a brand and building that know, like, and trust. It's like, I guess Coca-Cola, right? They've got the color, they've got the logo, everybody knows that. But I think for small businesses, we've got to do it differently. And we've got to figure out what we can do that is not just, throwing marketing budget at it. What can we do that a big company can't? And, I know their CEO can't spend, an hour a day on a podcast talking to people, but that's something that most small businesses can do. And it's very, very effective.
Yeah, it is. It really does. It does a lot for your SEO. It does a lot for people getting to hear you. And like you said, they have more of a sense of who you are when they actually make that first call, which I think it's also efficient, frankly, so that people don't feel like they have to spend a ton of time in meetings. Today is a little bit fast. So what would you say how would you define success for yourself in your position or for Interview Valet specifically?
It's one of those things. It's like the KPIs. What are you trying for? And the sad part is if you hit a KPI, set a KPI, you'll probably hit it, but that doesn't mean you'll be happy with it. So early on, I'd have to say in business, it was like, what's the top line sales number, right? And then after a while, you're like, that's for ego, right? It's not the top line, it's the bottom line, right? How many companies have been on the Inc. 5000 and then went out of business? They had lots of sales, they had no profits. And then it's the thing of, well, is it profits? Well, I don't know if I just do everything by the dollars, but I look at that and say, if we're making profits, that means we've got clients that value us and value what we do more than they value the money. So I think profits is one. And to me, it's also, I think I'm getting to the point where the team that I'm building, I'm very, very proud of that. It's almost like when you have children, right? And not saying that the team members are children, but when you first start a business, you have to do everything, right? It's like having a child. You got to do everything for them. And then you start to progress and then you fall back and, we had an accident. But then you get to a point where a client will come up and say, your company did this. It's almost like when somebody compliments your kids. It's like, they did what? Oh, that's great, right? And now I think I'm at the point where I'm really focused on how can I develop my team and my next level of leaders. And to me, that's what I get success from right now.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So I have a curiosity. You're obviously very familiar with podcasts. What do you think makes a good podcast for a business owner? Is it primarily matching them to something that's for their ideal client, or there are things that you would find that are generally good, regardless of industry or client?
Yeah. So when we're looking to match a podcast with a guest, we're always looking to maximize the impact for everybody, right? For the guest, for the host, for the audience. And more today, it's not only for the people, but it's also for SEO. And what impact is this going to have on the large language models that are finding people and recommending them? I really believe that ChatGPT is going to be our biggest referral source in the next year. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at lots of factors. The first one is who's listening, right? Because you can't say enough of the right things to the wrong people. There could be a great podcast on, knitting, right? World-class podcast. I would have nothing to offer it. So there's that fit there. We're also looking at the SEO, right? The backlinks from it. How many people are hearing it? And that could be the reach of it from, popularity, ratings and reviews, where it is on the global rank, but also social media. Are they promoting it? Are they promoting it to sites that matter to you? And finally, I think it's the content, right? Is it a meaningful conversation? Is this something that people would want to listen to? Is this something that you could repurpose and put out on social media, right? After doing this for, probably 15 years, you can see podcast hosts that are great and ones that struggle, right? And I think we've all seen that, even when we look back at like TV in the 1950s and you scratch your head going, people watched this. I think
Yeah.
it's the same way with podcasting, right? When they used to ask the same questions to every person, it got old real quick. And so for me, it's not an interview, it's a conversation. And if the host is interested in the conversation, if the guest is, then I believe that the audience will.
Yeah. That's a great perspective. And I will say, one of the things I like to talk about is what's unusual. And I think you really hit on that. And also, as a podcaster, there's a huge marketing interest in podcasts. So I get a lot of folks writing to say, hey, I have a guest for you. And I would say that one of the things you just said, I think, is one of the things that you do that's unusual is you actually care about the host, like my experience as well. And I don't know that I think that's one of those invisible things, but I could tell from the way that I was approached that there was an interest in understanding what my goals were for my show. And that I wouldn't have put it into those words, but now that you've said that, I'm like, oh, and that really does make a difference because I feel that sense of alignment. And I think that is unusual. And I love that. It's a win-win-win, which I think is always the best way to go.
Yeah, we don't use the word pitch. I know where it comes from, right? In PR, you pitch an idea, you pitch a story, but all of a sudden it's become we're pitching people. And that's dehumanizing to the guest and to the host, right? You pitch a baseball, you introduce a person. And before you introduce a person, you better know a little bit about both people. And so that's what we try to do is to understand the host, what they're interested in, what they want to share with the audience, and then understand the guest and to connect those. So it's a introduction that serves everyone.
Yeah, that has been my experience. So I appreciate that you set that standard for your people. What in your life or your past set the stage for you to get into this or see it as a need? There's lots of people who maybe have your identity or your experiences, but you took all of that and you turned it into an action that a lot of people were like, what's a podcast? What was that for you?
It's interesting. It's that unusual part. Right? I've always looked at things and been good at connecting dots, right? Taking something that used to work and say, how could we make this work now? And I always look at there's nothing revolutionary. It's all evolutionary. And the idea of leveraging other people's audiences or other people's platform, that's nothing I figured out, right? We did that as seen on TV. People were doing it on The Tonight Show for decades and decades. And it really was just like, okay, what's the next level of that? And trying to connect those dots and being curious to say, how could we make this work? And in any business at the beginning, you're like, this is either genius or stupidity. I don't know. One of the two, let's figure it out. And at times, if you're the first ones, there isn't that market where you've got to teach the market first. And I would rather do that than try to say, oh, I'm just like so-and-so, only I'm a little cheaper. Or I'm like just like so-and-so, but I'm better. What does that mean, right? I would like to come at it from a point of, I see the world differently. And thank God I was exposed to a gentleman early on in our company, Christopher Lockhead. He's the father of category design. If you ever heard of a book called Play Bigger, How Pirates, Innovators, and Dreamers Create and Dominate Markets. He actually sought us out to promote his book, and he's become a client, a referrer, a mentor, and a friend, and really talked to me. And I really learned about you've got to be different. You got to follow your difference and stake your claim in the world.
You had me at pirates.
Well, I was going to say, if you look him up online, he is known as a category pirate. He and Eddie Yoon, they're the category pirates. They always are interesting. They've always got a different point of view. And, today nobody wants more of the same, right? I want a fresh idea. If we're all the same, it's just a race to the bottom.
Yeah. So you talk about small businesses. Who would you say thrives with your service?
Mm-hmm. We have done this now for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have seen is that there are factors that will predict your success with podcast interview marketing. First of all, it has to be a relationship sale, right? If you're just selling widgets or transactions, nobody needs to know about you.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the earbuds, right? My earbuds go through the wash like every 2 weeks. I don't care who makes them. They're disposable to me. I don't need to listen to a podcast about why you started this earbud company.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a relationship sale that's meaningful to my life or to my business, I want to know the person's heart, their backstory, how they see the world. So that's the first aspect. And so for that reason, it works really well with nonfiction authors, with coaches, consultants, professional services, category designers. The second one is the market you serve. So if you have to drive to my store in Kalamazoo, Michigan, podcast interviews probably aren't the most effective form of marketing, right? You're going to be heard by the entire nation, but unless they're in a 5-mile radius, they're not a customer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one there too. And then I think the final one is someone that is in it for the long term, someone that's got a heart to serve for the education. We're very good at the beginning with the discovery calls with clients to say, will this work for you or won't this work for you, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody just is always looking for the silver bullet, right? What's the next hack that I can take to make $1 billion? It won't work for you. Mm-hmm. Guess what? It never works for you. Mm-hmm. The only person making $1 billion is the one selling you the secret. So the people that really look at this as an ongoing marketing effort, right? They understand in their heart that when they talk to people, they get hired, they make money. We had one client came to us and he said he's going with the Warren Buffett marketing plan. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, well, Warren Buffett won't invest in something that he doesn't understand. Okay. And he missed out on some good ones, but he says, if I don't understand it, I'm not going to invest in it. And this guy said the same thing with all the different marketing. He's like, I've spent years and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on SEO. He's like, I never understood it, but I understand that when I talk to people, I get business. So that's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes a lot of sense. At first, I was thinking like the Warren Buffett have lots of money, that marketing plan, that investing plan. Will you share some advice that you've received that has influenced the way you approach your work?
Yeah. And sometimes people will ask, what's like the best advice? And I think you can learn just as much from bad advice. And I think back to my grandfather, God love his soul. It's the only thing that old man ever told me that was wrong. And he was a great businessman. He ran a service station in the suburbs of Chicago. And I can still remember when I was young, going away to the Navy, I was having a beer with him. He thought it was my first beer. And he told me, choose carefully who you drink with because you can't choose who you work with. And I understand what he was talking about there. And for him and his generation, that was reality. Mm-hmm. For you and me, we have a totally different reality. And so we are at the point now where the vast majority of us, we've got the ability that other people have never had of we get to work with who we want, right? We've got access to all of these customers. So if you wouldn't want them to be around you and around your family, don't allow them to be around your business. So I use that as like a litmus test now. Does this person energize me? Do they bring me ideas, my creativity out? Do they value what I do, or are they a drain on me? And the thing is I find the people that energize me, I energize them. We bring value. There's that whole thing of life is too short for jerks. And so I always think of sometimes when business owners say, well, I've got to work with everyone, or I've got to work with this person because, they pay the bills. Well, they may be paying the bills, but they're probably not driving the profits, and they're definitely not driving the enjoyment. So that's one of the things that I have learned over the years, and that I share with people.
Thank you. I heartily affirm and agree with that. I think that is beautiful. And it was actually one of the goals I had with my consulting business, was to work with people that I respected and admired, and doing things that I believed in. I'm not actually a great salesperson, but I'm a great ambassador. I didn't know that that was a difference a long time ago. A friend of mine pointed it out, because, I used to do fundraising for nonprofits, and I'm really good at that. But it's because I'm a good ambassador. I don't do sales, but I do sell things, if that makes sense.
I love that idea of ambassador, because there's a great book called The Introvert's Edge by Matthew Pollard. And he talks about that the future is for introverts, right? The days of the carnival barker extrovert that is trying to sell everything to everybody, we just sort of, that's icky today. And people have the option to turn that off. But that person that's the introvert, that person that's the brand ambassador, it attracts the right people. And I have to remind myself and others that the right marketing makes sales so much easier. And marketing should be magnetic, right? So it attracts the right people and repels the wrong ones. At the end of the day, we all don't want more leads. We want more great clients. And we've got to do marketing that gets us those.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that you mentioned was talking about why introverts make better podcast guests, which I'm guessing has something to do with that, but I'd love to have you expand on that if you'd be up for it.
Yes. And this is something, after like 9 years, we started to look at it and said, what's the common theme with that? And one of the things that we see is that introverts tend to do better on one-on-one conversations. They're more thought out. They answer the questions better, and they've got expertise. And the not the vast majority, but the studies say the majority of the world is introverts. And for most of the time, getting up on the stage didn't work for them, or networking, going to the big events didn't work for them. But now we've got this medium where you and I can have a one-on-one conversation, right? This is the same conversation we would be having whether or not it was recorded or not. And now we can leverage that. We can share that with the world. And it's a great time to be an introvert. I think it's a bad time to be one of the carnival barkers, right? Because you think about it, nobody wants to deal with the used car salesman. That's why, Tesla has the no haggle price. That's why, was it Carvana or CarMax, one of those? They just realized we're doing away with this. And we're going to have the people that are focused on, I like your word, ambassadors, right? Who's the ambassador for the company? And it's a much more human way to do it.
Yeah. And more relational and more connective. And I feel like I see it a lot across industries. I'm lucky because I get to work in a lot of different industries, that people are really yearning for that feeling of being a part of things and being connected. And that does come more from what you're talking about, that one-to-one, and that feeling of not being sold, but being seen. Like, I see you, I see your interests. Let me share this thing I think you'll find exciting, instead of let me sell you on this thing that I'm trying to figure out how I can convince you that you want it.
I just wrote that down. Seen, not sold. I think of a client that came to us years ago in my previous company, and I was covering the phones at lunchtime. And he said, I love you guys. You're just like Preparation H. And I paused. I'm like, why are we like hemorrhoid cream?
Thank you.
And he's like, no, it's a compliment, right? You came recommended. You gave me relief fast. And it really struck me that we're all selling Preparation H. Nobody cares about the product or service. They just care about the pain in the rear end. And if you can understand that, be seen and not sold, you'll help a lot of people.
I love that. Oh my goodness, what a creative person. Oh man. What do? You seem very up and very joyful. And I also, my experience in business and in running a small business is there are days when you're a little bit less excited or maybe feel a little stuck or discouraged. What do you do to recharge or to inspire yourself?
You say days, there are hours, right? Sometimes it can go
Hours.
from hour to hour to be up and down.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I have found is that it's important to go from funk to function as quickly as possible. So if something would throw me off my game for a day, that's a wasted. How can I make that to throw me off my game for an hour or maybe 10 minutes? And one of the things that I have found, especially working remote here, is that just being isolated with myself and my own ideas can be a scary place, right? It's that echo chamber of woe and self-pity and not serving myself. So one of the things that I find is that when I walk, I'm always more positive and more creative. And when I talk to people, so my wife calls them walkie-talkies, right? If I've got 10 minutes or something like that, I might go for a walk and call somebody. I guarantee you, I will always feel better about that. And it might not have an agenda, just checking in with a family member, a friend, a teammate, a client, something like that. Those are things that I do to break that so I can go from funk to function. Because as you know, as a business owner, people watch you, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got to be careful how you show up there. And so that's a trick that I have found that works well for me.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And it also adds in that thing that is really true in humans, which is, we're social, so connection is always good. And like you said, a check-in, thinking about other people is almost always going to pull you out of a funk, because like that echo chamber, it's a very limited view. Whereas once you start thinking about someone else, you expand the size and scope of what you're participating in.
And that's one of the reasons I think at times this whole idea of one funnel away can be harmful to entrepreneurs, because it's this idea that all I need to do is sit down on my computer in solitude, build this perfect funnel, and everything will be magic, right? And I'm a big fan. I'm an engineer. I like automation. I like processes. But it's like, well, have you talked to a client, right? Why don't you get their feedback on it? Get their ideas on it. There are people out there that want to help you, right? Like our name, Interview Valet, that came from a client. I could have sat there for a weekend working on the perfect name, right? Or I could just start asking clients, what would you call this? Heck, they not only named it, he bought me the URL.
I love that. It's a great relationship too. Well, and that's something I do. One of the services I offer is a thing I made up called business cartography, which is I help people map their business ecosystem, because I feel like so much of business, the way that we talk about it is limited, especially for the smaller companies and entrepreneurs. They get into it because they're excited and they have an idea. And then they try to sort of fit themselves into the way it's done, but they're actually innovating. So the way it's done hasn't been created yet. And my personal belief is that it needs to work for them. They need to feel, especially from my experience of creative people, and problem solving is a form of creativity, you have to have some downtime, some back brain time is what I like to call it, to generate ideas. You can't just always be head down productive, whatever that means. I think we need to expand our understanding of the word productive as well. So there's a lot to it, but by thinking about it in terms of let's map out not just a roadmap, but the ecosystem in which you thrive and operate, so that you can bring a fully functioning, thriving self to what you're doing, as opposed to, like you said, let's make a funnel, which might be a great idea, but let's actually start with figuring that out first.
Yeah. And I love the idea of that cartography, right? That map. And what's the map for you on that? I think too often we're told this idea of hustle, right? Just hustle, grind. And the vision I always have of that is somebody sitting in a rowboat pulling on one oar, right? And they're just going around in circles, and somebody's just telling them to hustle and grind more. It's like, all you're doing is going around in circles faster. Why don't you pause, ask somebody, hey, do you have a map? Why aren't I going somewhere? And it's like, no, you got to go straight, not in circles. So I think that outside perspective can be very helpful too, in somebody that can see what the map is.
Yeah, and help you, and that's what also probably why my ears perked up when you talked about pirates, because a friend of mine actually was helping me when I started doing my marketing, because I was trying to figure out how do I talk about this more effectively to people, because it's sort of my thing, and I've always done it this way, but I have words for it, right? Because when it's your instinctive way of being, it's hard to externalize it. That process for when you're creating something is harder because it's so automatic. You think, well, doesn't everybody do this? No, that's why you're here, to help with that. And she at first talked about pirates and treasure map. And I'm like, I love pirates. And that just doesn't feel right to me. And then we were bouncing it off. And I said, but cartography can help a pirate, but it also can help everybody else. So, for folks that are listening that want to learn more, follow you, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, one of the things is just go to Interview Valet with a V.com/unusual. And, just for business as unusual. And everything we talked about will be there. There's actually an assessment, right? 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you? There's a copy of my book. You can buy it on Amazon. Or if you want a free copy of Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy, it's there. And then I'll also put all my social media and my calendar link. If you'd like to talk about how you could use podcast interview marketing to grow your brand and grow your business, that'll all be back there at interviewvalet.com/unusual.
Love that. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I guess the last thing would be just remember what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And so often people are like, well, what would I talk about on a podcast? Right? You've earned so many hard lessons about your business, about your experience, about your insights, and sharing that with someone else as a podcast host, as a podcast guest, can make your life richer and their life richer.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'll talk to you next week. I hope you enjoy the show. I love making it. If you did enjoy it, consider hopping over to the review portion of the platform you listen on and letting other people know about it. Or share the episode or the entire show with a friend or subscribe to the show. Definitely reach out, get on my newsletter, follow me on social media, and let me know what you like, what you don't like, and what you'd like to see in the future. Well, we love our guests. Appearance on the Business as Unusual podcast or any Bicurean consulting production is for information purposes only and is not to be considered an endorsement of their business practices, or character. Please properly vet anyone you find through this podcast and generally before you do any business with them. Thank you for listening.